All right, viewers, I want to use this opportunity to thank Americans and Donald Trump in particular, if not for anything, for the effort they are making to bring peace into Nigeria. You don't know the importance of peace. If you don't know, let me tell you, we, the Igbos from this side, we cherish peace so much that we only required peace in what we are doing. Nigeria can go with their oil, Nigeria can go with whatever they want, but give us peace, peaceful environment to be able to thrive and do our businesses. Very okay for us. That is what people required. You are talking about oil, you are talking about mineral resources, why people are dying. Will you be alive to enjoy the oil, to enjoy the mineral resources? Even while you are alive, you have not enjoyed these things. You have not enjoyed these things as Nigerians. Initially, when we heard that Americans are coming, some say, hey, America is coming to take oil, they're coming to do this. Yeah. But you know, it is only the living. And as you are alive now, what have you enjoyed in Nigeria? Tell yourself the truth. And they are planning to increase the tax. They will collect the one they have from you and put it into their account. That is the plan. So, number one thing we should be asking for is peace, wherever the peace is going to come out from. That's why you see a lot of people agitating for Biafra. Let there be balkanization. People are speaking up now. Let there be balkanization of Nigeria so that people will have, like minds together. If you are Islam, then you practice your Sharia with like minds. That is the purpose of people clamoring for this balkanization, division in Nigeria. Well, I said I thank America so much because their Congress have been discussing this issue of genocide in Nigeria against Christians, on what to do about that. And thank God they had discussion 2 days ago. That's 4th of February. The last one they did was around 2 months ago. And for the benefit of doubt, the video is not yet available. The one they did yesterday, 2 days ago, is not available. But that of 2 months ago is available and is worthy to be listened to, so that you hear their discussions, how they are traced. You hear the questions they are asking in that video, the kind of teachings that are going on in these areas, and every other thing, questions that are being thrown at people, concerning this. In fact, I wish there could be a kind of phone-in program from all over the world, or probably from the area this thing is happening, so that they will hear. Though Americans have their intel, they have details of everything. The people that they send to Nigeria have gathered enough information
against Boko Haram and another ruthless jihadist terrorist group. You've been reading about them. They kidnapped the young girls and young women, many of whom never are seen again. It's tough stuff. This summer it was my honor to meet with 2 brave young women, Joy Bishara and Lydia Pogu, who were kidnapped by Boko Haram in April of 2014 at the secondary school in Nigeria. I was deeply moved by their inspiring stories of courage, resilience, and survival. They really were 2 amazing young women. I told Joy and Lydia, my administration is committed to combating both jihadist terrorism and the scourge of human trafficking and smuggling. In the world today, there is more human trafficking than there has ever been, if you can believe this. They use the internet better than almost anybody is able to use the internet.
Until the video drops, I will show you guys the latest update concerning what Americans are doing in Nigeria and the latest briefings concerning that. But if you want to trace the origin where it all started, watch this video that I am going to drop, so that you hear from the congressmen what they are discussing about Nigeria. It is not the America. See, Trump is not joking. No, Trump is not joking about what is happening in Nigeria. Probably he wants to finish with Iran. He wants to conclude with Iran before he will come in full force on Nigeria. This thing must stop. Nobody has monopoly of violence. everybody, every human being has violence in him, but religion should teach us how to calm ourselves, and that is what Christianity is teaching us, and that is it. So please watch the video, and when we come back, we'll continue.
One of the things that we know in the Middle East is looking at the curriculums that are taught in schools, and especially some of the curriculum that we saw that was being taught in Gaza to the young children about killing a Jewish soldier is something worthy of. I mean, do we see this sort of education system at all in these countries? Because what are the young people learning? Are they learning to be pursuing peace and prosperity? Or are they also being taught anywhere in these schools some sort of jihadist activity is worthy of accomplishing?
Refer to my colleague from DRL as well, since they publish reports on this that cover some of these issues.
Sure. So you'll see in our human rights reports where we call out human rights violations across countries around the world. In terms of Nigeria's curriculum in particular, I don't have that information right in front of me, but we're happy to report back to you on the committee.
Sure. No, that's fine. I appreciate you both, and thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for having this hearing.
Thank you for your questions and comments. We are joined by the former chairman of the Africa Subcommittee, who is now over at the Energy and Commerce Committee, John James, and I want to thank him. February of 2024, he had a very important hearing on Nigeria and other advocacy throughout that time. So the floor is yours.
Mr. Chairman, thank you so much for your personal invitation, for your leadership, and for your friendship. I'm honored to be back. Psalms 96:14 asks, "Who will rise up for me against the wicked? Who will take a stand for me against evildoers?" Nigeria is facing one of the gravest religious freedom crises in the world. As the former chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee on Africa, I have visited and have seen firsthand the direness of the conditions in what is now the deadliest place on earth to be a Christian. They are targeted, displaced, and killed simply for their faith. The ancient plea, "Is there no help for the widow's son?" still echoes today. Since 2019, nearly 17,000 Christians have been killed. In the first 7 months of this year alone, hundreds more were murdered. On June 13th, during the Yellowwater massacre, more than 280 Christians were slaughtered in a single day. These are not isolated tragedies, but a sustained pattern of religiously motivated violence, often ignored or even enabled by the Nigerian government. Extremist groups like Boko Haram, Fulani militants, and ISIS West Africa attack often without any meaningful intervention from authorities. The lack of response has created an atmosphere of impunity where Christians continue to live in constant threat and fear. The United States has previously recognized this crisis. President Trump not only designated Nigeria as a country of particular concern during his first term, but redesignated it again in his second term after President Biden inexplicably removed that designation. Religious persecution is tied to political repression and weakening institutions in Nigeria. Example, the detention of Mazi Nnamdi Kanu is a clear example. In 2022, Nigeria's Court of Appeal struck down the charges against him and ordered his release. The UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention has also called for his unconditional release. Yet he remains in solitary confinement, in deteriorating health, and recently had to represent himself in court. Nigeria has signaled that the law is optional and targeting Christians is fair game. Just hours ago this morning, despite the pleas and cries of the Nigerian people and many Nigerian lawmakers, Mazi Nnamdi Kanu was convicted on all charges. For fiscal year 2025, the U.S. has requested nearly $8 billion for sub-Saharan Africa. But when Americans see political prisoners, judicial defiance, and the slaughter of Christians, they understandably ask as they meet their own struggles, why should our tax dollars support governments that refuse to protect their own people? Is our aid aiding a genocide? Nigeria is a nation of tremendous potential, but that potential is being choked out by violent persecution of its Christian population. No country can build a stable future where churches are burned, believers are killed, and communities live in fear. The United States must stay engaged, and Nigeria must change course now. Mr. Pratt, a direct question. Do you believe, in your professional assessment, that the government of Nigeria has been infiltrated by jihadists?
I do not believe that the government of Nigeria has been infiltrated by jihadists.
Okay, because when you look at the selective enforcement of the rule of law, one might question if there are any favoritism or looking the other way when groups are being specifically targeted, despite the fact, as my colleague Mr. Moore mentioned, not enforcing the rule of law with regard to weapons. My next question, how has the Nigerian government reacted since President Trump's country of particular concern designation announcement?
They have taken the designation very seriously. There is a senior delegation here now. They will meet with the most senior officials of the U.S. government this week, and we have already demarched the government in Abuja and here in Washington on the action plan, and I can say that the results so far have been positive in terms of cooperation.
The Nigerian government needs to do more to address this issue themselves, but what measures are being taken to assist Nigeria to increase its focus on persecution, particularly in the Middle Belt?
Yeah, so thank you for your question, Congressman James. As you mentioned, the Middle Belt is a particular concern. That's where Christians, you mentioned Yelawada, where 250 or 280 Christians were killed, massacred. They were targeted because they were Christians. Churches have been burned there. There have been internally displaced people there. And so we're reviewing all options at the State Department, including Chairman Smith, you mentioned in our bureau, we have Global Magnitsky Act sanctions. We have other tools at our disposal as well to make sure that Nigeria, the Nigerian government gets the message that we are serious about the persecution of Christians and other communities as well, but particularly Christians right now who are suffering disproportionately in the Middle Belt.
Thank you for your answer, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for having me again. God bless you, and good luck. I'm here for you.
Thank you so very much, Chairman James, and thank you again for your great service. I'd like to, between the ranking member and I, we're both going to ask one more question and then go to our next panel. I would like to yield mine to my good friend, Mr. Hozenga, who asked a very serious question about the IDPs in Benue, and if there's any answer that you wanted to give and the tyranny of the clock precluded that, please feel free to do so, and then I'll yield to my friend and colleague.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you yielding to me, and I think you saw my passion on this earlier, but there are serious issues, and part of that interview from Arise TV, one of the other questions to me was, well, doesn't the CPC damage Nigeria economically in a way that is going to disincentivize economic growth and foreign companies coming into the country? And my answer to them was actually, I think the current state of violence is as much a deterrent of a foreign company or a U.S. company coming into Nigeria. And I know the goal of the CPC is to correct behavior, but could you explain a little bit exactly what you would expect to see out of a CPC and what sort of changes it might bring? And then I want to address the 1.4 million who are considered the internally displaced people, IDPs, in Benue, and what the game plan would be to provide the IDPs in Benue and Taraba, what sort of assistance they can depend on from the U.S.
Thank you very much, Representative. This CPC designation, we hope, will focus the energy of the government of Nigeria, as well as our own government here, on all of the tools that we have available. And so by setting up this task force that I referred to and looking at all of the types of assistance that we can bring to bear, but more importantly, what the government of Nigeria can do to own this problem and improve security for all Nigerians, but in particular, tackle this problem that we're talking about.
But they have to admit there's a problem first, right? Okay, and I think that's been one of my concerns is I have not seen an actual admission to this being a problem. It's been given excuses and veneers of a lot of other issues that get parroted both here and in the media. Can you talk about the displaced persons and the help that they could be expecting?
On displaced persons, we do have programs that address this, and we want to make that part of the action plan that we are working on. My colleague from DRL may want to provide more in particular on IDPs.
Sure. As Ambassador Pratt just mentioned, the State Department is reviewing options to help IDPs. You mentioned what actions we want to see from the Nigerian government. That includes, as we've mentioned here several times, prosecutions of perpetrators.
Amen.
That includes reduced violence in the Middle Belt. And that includes
against all.
Against
right?
all. Exactly.
Christians, moderate Muslims, anybody who is not being targeted, right?
Exactly right. So the Trump administration stands firmly for the principle that religious freedom is for all religious communities and those who don't practice a faith. It is a per se good, and we're committed to helping protect communities all around the world who are experiencing religious persecution, not just in Nigeria, not just Christians. At the end of the day, we want the number to be 0 in Nigeria. We don't want any religious persecution to happen. We don't want it to just be a reduction in violence. We want there to be 0 people who are murdered because of their faith.
Amen to that. Corruption continues to undermine Nigeria's institutions, including those tasked with protecting civilians sometimes. I've heard from some of these instances and conversations I've had with religious leaders in Nigeria who don't feel that the Nigerian government is equipped to respond to the crisis. How does corruption within the security forces hinder the government's ability to prevent and respond effectively to religiously motivated violence?
I mean, corruption is a major problem globally, and in Africa and in Nigeria. I think that it erodes capability, right? It erodes the confidence of the forces, especially at the working level. If they see that their superiors are engaged in corruption, that totally undermines the whole enterprise.
And I assume that is part of State Department's and this administration's action plan that they want to see out of the Nigerian government.
Absolutely.
The Tinubu government is a crackdown on corruption.
To be more effective, absolutely.
All right, thank you. Time has expired. I appreciate the opportunity, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much. Mr. Jacobs.
Thank you. I yield to Mr. Apal.
Thank you so much, Ranking Member Jacobs, for yielding. I think this has actually been a good discussion on this committee and an important one around what strategy we use to eliminate violence against any community. And I think the issue for me is that if you define the problem as people being attacked only because of their religion, that would lead you to one set of solutions. If you define the problem as people being attacked for other reasons, it would lead you to a different set of conclusions and strategies. And I think, Ambassador Pratt, I resonated when you said we have lots of tools in the toolbox. One of those tools is just around the kind of assistance we give to efforts that are cross-faith, interfaith, cross-cultural, building the kinds of ties that we need to build. Because I think this is not a religious oppression Olympics. We're not trying to say one religion is worse oppressed than another. We're saying, how do we get to that ending point that we all agree on, that there shouldn't be violence against any of these communities? And so I guess I want to ask you about programming that specifically promotes interfaith or cross-cultural dialogue. The foreign assistance review that was conducted earlier this year actually this administration cut many of those types of programs, and there are suggestions that there's going to be even more cuts that focus on these kinds of programs. One of the ones I was looking at very carefully that I know is Nigerian Youth Care, and that's one that provided Nigerian youth with mentorship and training on how to bridge religious and cultural divides. Given the administration's concerns about religious conflict and some of the shared goals we've articulated, can you explain why that contract was canceled?
Thank you for your question, Representative. So there is ongoing programming in Nigeria that addresses some of the issues that you've raised. Our early warning, early response programs, for instance, also have kind of an interfaith dialogue built into them. We've seen great success from people who have experienced the program, saying that they have increased, they've seen greater tolerance amongst their communities, et cetera, et cetera. So we have effective programming. Broadly, in terms of foreign assistance, the Trump administration is reviewing every foreign assistance dollar, not to cut, but to make it more effective. We've reprioritized, we've reshaped foreign assistance in a way not to eliminate foreign assistance, but to make it more strategic. The United States has been the most generous partner around the world of any country for foreign assistance. Secretary Rubio has said we will continue to be the most generous country. So I'm happy to share some of the programming success we've seen and get back to you on those answers.
I would appreciate that. And if you can look into this one in particular, and I might send you a few others, because I think that if you say that you're only going to focus on a particular kind of program and you say some of these things are not effective, my work overseas in all of these countries says that some of this work takes time to develop the kind of leadership that is not going to be divided down the road. And so it may not have the same metrics of success immediately that you see, but I think many of these programs really do prove to be extremely important in the long term. And so I just would like to know, what is the status of each of those U.S.-funded programs related to religious tolerance? If you could share a list of that with me, I would really appreciate it. And what new assistance programs should we expect that the administration, maybe you can speak to this part, that the administration is going to promote? That's the second part of the question. And then the third part of the question for you is, I am concerned about some of the reports I'm hearing that certain programs are just going to be cut because they focus on particular communities, or they, are framed in a way that somehow is part of a some sham DEI initiative. And so maybe you could speak to those last two and get me the list of the first one.
Sure. So I'm happy to follow up with the committee on specific program we have across Africa. The administration is committed to using its foreign assistance effectively and strategically, and gets the most bang for its buck for American taxpayers, because ultimately we're responsible to the American taxpayers. So in terms of programming, I'm happy to get you the specific answers that you're looking for. In terms of the other questions you raised about specific communities being having greater assistance, I forget how you phrased it, more targeted programs. We want religious freedom for all communities, full stop. We don't want religious freedom for some communities. We want religious freedom for all religious communities, including those who don't practice faith. We think it's a violation of a moral law that somebody is killed because of their faith. We see that happening in all parts of the world, and the Trump administration is committed to helping countries take ownership of their own issues and actually go after people who persecute Christians and Muslims and people of all faiths, and actually shift the responsibility to where we want to help partner with these countries, but at the end of the day, the countries themselves have an obligation to protect religious freedom in their countries, and we're committed to do that.
I agree with you on what you said. I just would say I'd like to see the data that backs up what you're saying, and why certain programs that seem very much in line with what you're saying are being canceled. So I appreciate your attention to this, and we'll follow up. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member.
And thank you. Thank you both for your testimonies, but above all for your leadership. It's extraordinary. And so thank you, and we'll move on to our second panel. Thank you. I'd like to now welcome to the witness table. And we will show a very short video that was just taped yesterday from Mrs. Akpen, I should say, a survivor of the Yellowwater massacre. She lost 5 of her children, and it's just one example of the incredible heartbreak of being slaughtered because she's a Christian, because her family was a Christian. And that'll be showing in 1 second. But if our witnesses could come to the table. You can put the video up. We'll come back to the video in a minute. Let me introduce our distinguished witnesses, beginning with Nina Shea, a senior fellow and director at the Center for Religious Freedom at the Hudson Institute. Ms. Shea has been a human rights lawyer for over 30 years. She works extensively for the advancement of individual religious freedom and other human rights in U.S. foreign policy as it confronts an ascendant Islamic extremism that we're seeing in Nigeria, for example. And I want to thank her for her leadership. She has testified before, and her wisdom has been greatly esteemed by this committee, and particularly by this chairman. We'll then hear from Oge Bugu, is that correct? Thank you. Who is director and senior fellow of the Africa Program and CSIS and a foreign policy leader with 2 decades of experience shaping policy and engagement on Africa and U.S.-Africa relations. Most recently, she served as director of the Africa Program at the Wilson Center, where she led research and programs that centered African knowledge and agency in developing actionable strategies to address critical issues facing Africa and the U.S. Relations. I would like to yield now such time as she may consume, and then to you as well, to our witnesses. Nina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member Jacobs and members of the committee for holding this very important hearing. The debate about CPC designation for Nigeria began in earnest in Washington last spring after you, Mr. Chairman, had introduced a resolution that urged CPC designation for Nigeria, as you had previously done in 22, and when this subcommittee held a pivotal hearing on the case for Nigeria's CPC designation last March. Thankfully, President Trump listened, and he made his decision based on 2 criteria. One, under the International Religious Freedom Act, that these were severe violations of religious freedom, and that the government of Nigeria, President Tinubu, was either actively engaged or tolerating these violations. Those are the criteria of the IRF Act. So Nigeria's multifaceted terror problem that has had a devastating impact on both Muslims and Christians alike is well known, but the long overlooked persecution of Nigeria's Middle Belt Christians by Fulani jihadi militias finally got Washington's attention when that March hearing was held, and Bishop Anagbe testified. The bishop gave startling firsthand testimony that described frequent raids on farmlands of his Makurdi diocese by armed Fulani Muslim herders who kill, rape, or kidnap residents, all the while shouting the jihadi battle cry, Allahu Akbar. Bishop Anagbe, who testified today as well, and I'm honored to be part of this hearing with him, related that 20 parishes in his diocese have been shut down because of these attacks. Moreover, he said, Nigeria's government was doing nothing to stop this. I agreed in my testimony then that Nigeria should be designated a CPC precisely because the relentless and systematic Fulani attacks targeting Middle Belt Christians are carried out with complete government impunity. By contrast, the government is fighting the terror groups in the north. So this is really key to understanding why CPC is warranted in this case. The bishop's frank testimony required heroic courage. He soon began receiving death threats. A few weeks later, Fulani militants attacked his home village and massacred 12 of his relatives and scores of others. The priest directing his Justice and Peace Office, who took the body counts and came to the aid of survivors in such attacks, has been forced to take temporary leave after credible threats to his life. Mr. Chairman and White House, Mr. Chairman, you and White House officials who had met with Bishop Anagbe were appalled when you heard of this. The attack was part of the brutal pattern seen in hard-hit Benue and various other Middle Belt states, but it also raised the concern that this attack was in reprisal for his testimony to Congress, one organized not simply by nomadic herders, but by those in Nigeria who are close observers of Washington. 2 weeks after that incident, Yelawada, which is, by the way, only 5 miles from the state capital of Makurdi, that's Benue State, was hit by a large Fulani raid. Others have spoken about that. Over 270 Christians were murdered, and the victims included some who had been displaced from their hometowns by prior Fulani raids and had sought refuge in Yelawada because there's a military garrison there. The Nigerian troops there did not put up a fight against the dozens of, and it was only dozens, of Fulani attackers who swarmed in on motorcycles and some on foot, wielding assault rifles and machetes as their weapons. This has been going on for years, again with government impunity. Similar attacks are taking place elsewhere in the Middle Belt. To give one recent example, Catholic priest Father George Dogo told the outlet Truth Nigeria, which is directed by former State Department official Douglas Burton, that 10 days ago in Taraba, Fulani militants stormed through a local government area, indiscriminately killing 20 people and burning and damaging homes and churches. A survivor, Christiana Joseph, a 33-year-old farmer from Amadu village, told Truth Nigeria that as she was preparing to go to early morning mass, a Fulani militia arrived on motorcycles and shot into her house. She is quoted stating, "They fired for about 5 minutes, shouting Allahu Akbar. When the gunfire stopped, I went inside and found my husband of 14 years, John Joseph, already dead." Survivor Samson Haruna also stated that attackers on motorcycles with AK assault rifles strafed houses in his neighboring village. He said, "My neighbors, David Bawa and Titus Gregory, lost 5 family members between them. My house was riddled with bullets." According to the Truth Nigeria report on this Taraba attack, quote, "The Fulani militants that attacked were led by warlord Alhaji Tukur, according to community leader Usa. Wakori Diocese Bishop Mark Nzukwane called the crisis overwhelming and said that 335 Catholic churches have been destroyed and more than 300,000 Catholics there have been displaced beginning in 2015. That's just in his diocese. According to the head of a local security consultancy, Fulani militants plan and stage their attacks from an abandoned resort, now overgrown with vegetation, called Damjuma Farm, that the Fulani use as a cover for cattle grazing, he said. That's the head of this security agency. But that's just a smokescreen. And he commented that if the government wants to stop the attacks, they must clear out the terrorists from Danjuma farms. In a Daily Post Nigeria article, Reverend John Lekel, the director of social communications for the Wakori Diocese, that's the same diocese that I've been talking about, described the situation as devastating, revealing that many rural parishes have been abandoned following sustained assaults that have claimed multiple lives and destroyed entire villages. Bishop Nzukwane told the respected ACI Africa outlet last year that, quote, "If peace is restored, the region's rich agricultural landscape could provide a prosperous future for its residents. Instead," he said, "there is food scarcity because of these constant attacks." And there are countless reports like this across the Middle Belt. I mention this one because it shows that Abuja has failed to act even when the Fulani aggressors are identified and their base from which they launch repeated attacks are known. This represents not only a horrifying pattern of severe persecution by Fulanis targeting largely Christian areas, but also a shocking pattern of government tolerance of this persecution. I want to give one last example from Plateau State that occurred a month ago. The Reverend Ezekiel Dechomo of Plateau, who is the regional chairman of the Church of Christ in Nations, told journalist and Jos on October 24 that Islamic extremists have threatened to murder him from calling on the Nigerian and U.S. governments to help protect Christians against genocide. He told the Christian outlet Morning Star News, quote, "My life is in grave danger. Even as I speak, I am on the lookout for attacks. I no longer sleep with my eyes closed. I have been attacked before but escaped. The threats came after he appeared in a video on October 15, standing in a mass grave containing the remains of a dozen slain church members, reportedly killed by Fulani herders. And Mr. Chairman, there have been hundreds of priests and pastors killed in the last 15 years, targeted, not as the State Department reports that they were walking alone or unguarded on a road at night, but they've been attacked and killed in their rectories, homes, and inside their churches. As the Nigeria government issues denials and watches passively, with no Fulanis prosecuted and no Nigerian forces prepared to defend the vulnerable, the Christian death toll from Fulani militia attacks alone, leaving aside the terror attacks from Boko Haram and ISWAP and the others, is in the thousands, and Christian survivors in displacement camps number in the millions. The respected research group Open Doors cites Nigeria as now the world's most dangerous country for Christians because of their religion. Again, at this time, most Nigerian Christians are being murdered by Fulani militias, and they are the militia's special target. Aid to the Church in Need reported last month, quote, and this is a pontifical foundation that says this, Nigerian Christians in the Middle Belt are bearing the brunt of violent attacks from those identified as Fulani militants. Some insist that the violent aggression by the Fulani herders against the Christian farmers on their own land is the unavoidable result of climate change. The State Department Religious Freedom Reports have annually described these indiscriminate mass killings as clashes between two socioeconomic groups who fight over scarce resources brought on by climate change. Religion has nothing to do with it, they claim. This justification of Fulani violence has recently shifted. Now it is generally acknowledged that Christians are being murdered in cold blood, but it is being argued that more Muslims are killed in the violence, and this proves it has nothing to do with religion, they say. This argument is not factual, and it is irrelevant for CPC. The premise that more Muslims than Christians are killed is debatable, as the scholarly Observatory for Religious Freedom in Africa documents. In any case, most Nigerian Muslims live in the north, where Boko Haram and a plethora of ISIS and al-Qaeda-linked Islamic terrorist groups attack them and non-Muslims alike, and this violence, too, is religiously based. However, significant for CPC criteria, the Nigerian military is actively fighting those terror groups in the north. By contrast, in the Middle Belt, where most of the Christians are being killed in recent years, and where Christians are the special target of Fulani herder militias, the government isn't lifting a finger against the Fulani militants. Instead, it is tolerating them and denying it is happening. I have also heard about sporadic Christian attacks on Muslim villages. To the extent that the government is not taking action in those cases, that is further reason for CPC designation. Political momentum to list Nigeria among the world's worst persecutors gained throughout October as the annual CPC review neared the year-end deadline, and reports of massacres kept coming. On October 21, the Pontifical Foundation, Aid to the Church in Need, issued its World Survey that reported, quote, the number and ferocity of the attacks on Christian villages in the Middle Belt have led some experts to conclude that these incursions are a deliberate land grab to remove Christians and Islamize the region, end quote. Various high-level White House officials in the State Department were also hearing from groups of religious freedom activists on Nigeria. Later that week, President Trump made the CPC designation. For the first time, the issue of Fulani militias targeting Christians for mass murder received official U.S. acknowledgement when Secretary Rubio addressed this. This, in turn, got the attention of Nigeria's President Tinubu, who said he is willing to work with the U.S. Until now, he has not shown the political will to stop this Fulani violence. CPC, as you know, is a two-step process. The next step in this process requires the President to adopt a policy response. And we heard today from the State Department about what is being considered. And there are several actions that I also endorse. One is to, it's been raised before by Representative Moore, and it's my first recommendation, disarm Fulani herders. These militias are loosely organized. They don't have explosives or drones, don't use tunnels, suicide vests, or propaganda films. They are an unsophisticated, but nevertheless lethal force because they come armed with AK-47s and 49s, while their targets have only homemade pipe bombs to defend, pipe guns to defend themselves with. Assault rifles, such as those used by the Fulanis, are heavily regulated by Nigeria's Firearms Act and illegal for the targeted Christian farming villages. The act specifically only allows homemade what are called Dane guns, cap guns, and other muzzle-loading guns. The act thus outlaws the firearms that would match the assault rifle firepower of Fulani militias and leaves the peaceful Christian communities essentially defenseless. President Tinubu should order the removal of Fulani heavy weapons, raiding their encampments at Dan Juma Farm in Taraba and other places in the process. He should direct the powerful cattle breeders associations, such as the Mayetiala Cattle Breeders Association, to cooperate in doing this. Two, fortifying targeted areas. So U.S. foreign aid in Nigeria in recent years has amounted to about $1 billion annually. Areas targeted by these Fulani militias should receive some of this aid to securely return home and reclaim their properties, rebuild, and defend themselves. For example, this aid could go toward intelligence sharing, the training and equipping of local private security guards, as well as other measures. Again, the Fulani militias are not the formidable foes seen in ISIS and al-Qaeda, and their attacks could be prevented relatively easily, prevented and defended against by these basic measures. Humanitarian aid is important, and this should be for the victims of Fulani herder militia attacks, and this should be distributed through trusted local providers, including through the churches on the ground that are currently one of the main aid providers to the survivors of these attacks. And it's just, again, tragic and ironic that productive farmers now need food aid since they have been driven from their Middle Belt farms. 4, sanctions against those aiding, abetting, and granting impunity to the Fulani herding militias, including those sanctions should include high-level officials in the criminal justice system and the military. The U.S. should gather intelligence regarding official responses to the Fulani herder militias and review possible visa and Magnitsky sanctions for those aiding and abetting. The Fulani warlords' names are known or knowable. Out of all the, I think it's important to understand that out of all the violent attacks by Fulani herder militias, there have been only a few arrests. One involved the prosecution of a Fulani herder who was convicted of destroying melons at a melon company who received a 10-year sentence. It shows the government can get tough when it wants to. And 2 high-profile legal cases of violent attacks on Christians have seen movement in recent months. One concerns the Catholic Church of St. Francis in Ondo, where terrorists killed some 40 worshipers on Pentecost Sunday in 2022. Depositions are being taken in that case. Ondo's bishop recently told me, but the trial has not yet started. It's important to note that's not in the Middle Belt, it's in the South. The 5 suspects being held are said to be part of the East African Shabab terror group and are not members of the Fulani herder militia. The other case involves the Yelawada massacre itself, where charges are filed, have been filed against 5 Fulani herders in September, in an extremely rare example of prosecution that I believe is attributable to the pressure raised by the CPC debate in Washington. Finally, the International Religious Freedom Act suggests as a possible policy response to CPC designation a binding agreement with the country to prevent further violence. So I think that that is something that should be considered as well. unfortunately, President Tinubu hasn't shown the political will so far to direct the police and military action within his power. And he argues that because the police force is centralized under the Constitution, he is overwhelmed. He says that a constitutional amendment is required to give back policing power to the governors of the state, and that could take years. However, right now there exist legal ways he can shore up defenses within the targeted Christian areas. For example, decentralizing police commands internally, or empowering local guards, or deploying more mobile police units to states, and prioritizing referrals of state governor police orders for presidential review. So I suggest that the U.S. enter into a binding agreement with Nigeria to ensure this needed police protection against the Fulani militias. Since President Trump's CPC designation, I note some Nigerian officials, including generals of a force in the southern state of Ondo, who cite worries about securing Nigeria's wide open border, already asked for U.S. partnership in an effort to help, to quote, help flush out Fulani ethnic militia terrorists from the Southwest. Thank you.
Ms. Shea, thank you so very much for that very well thought out testimony. I mean, you have so much in there, and I'll go back and read it to pull out much of what you have just conveyed to the committee. So thank you for that. And I'd like now recognize our next witness, Ms. Anabugu.
Thank you very much. Chairman Smith, Ranking Member Jacobs, distinguished members of the committee, I'm honored to share my views before this committee today. Just want to state that CSIS does not take policy positions, so the views represented in this testimony are my own and not those of my employer. In this testimony, I would like to reinforce the recommendations that I made before this committee in March. In addition, I would like to reflect on how this tenuous moment in U.S.-Nigeria relations provide an opportunity for both countries to work together to address the critical threats of jihadist violence and insecurity in Nigeria, and to develop a more strategic partnership. The United States and Nigeria have a complicated bilateral relationship with shared interest in counterterrorism and economic development. But this relationship is often marked by periods of friction. Nigeria wields significant continental and regional influence, but grapples with violent extremism and internal security. Nigeria's leadership in West Africa is crucial, and its ability to address its governance and security challenges will impact not only its future, but the wider region. Nigeria's instability stems from a key shortcoming. Despite 64 years of independence, it has yet to establish a national identity grounded in basic freedoms and dignity. Currently, ethnicity, religion, and language, rather than nationality, define the identity of its diverse population. Understanding the violence in Nigeria requires looking beyond its apparent religious and ethnic motivations. For me, growing up in Jos Plateau State, I've witnessed the impacts of these ongoing conflicts on vibrant communities. In addition, coming from a family involved in Christian missionary work, I recognize the shared faith between Christian communities in Nigeria's Middle Belt and those in the US, rooted in the history of American missionary efforts. However, a narrow narrative that reduces Nigeria's security situation to a single story and frames it solely as the persecution of Christians oversimplifies the issue. Religious and ethnic violence is driven more by governance failures and is worsened by hate speech and conspiracy theories rather than being just a singular conflict. Nigeria is facing multiple security crises due to religious extremism, banditry, criminality, resource competition, communal disputes, and separatist agitation. These issues are intertwined with history, poverty, and political contestation. The interplay between religion and politics in Nigeria is deep and complex. Leaders often romanticize the country's unity, but fail to foster it, as we saw in the divisive 2023 elections. As Nigeria approaches another national election in 2027, religion will once again continue to influence candidate selection, voter behavior, and campaign strategies. The Trump administration's claims that Nigeria is permitting targeted killings of Christians distracts from the broader issue of extremist violence and insecurity in the country. Since returning to civilian rule in 1999, Nigeria has been a major recipient of US security assistance, primarily aimed at counterterrorism. Despite this significant assistance, the extremist threat in Nigeria has worsened, expanding from the northeast, where Boko Haram has waged a 15-year insurgency, to the northwest, where so-called bandits are raiding villages. Most victims in both of these regions are Muslims. Since Boko Haram's emergence in 2009, Nigerian administrations, including the administration of President Tinubu, have struggled to improve security. And many Nigerians across the country acknowledge that the situation has only worsened in recent years. Therefore, narratives focusing solely on the killing of Christians often overlook Nigeria's broader insecurity and the fact that religion is usually a secondary factor in the violence. Recent violence in the Middle Belt predominantly affects Christian farming communities from various ethnic groups. Victims are mostly believed to be killed by Fulani herders who are primarily Muslims. But the killings aren't explicitly motivated by religious reasons. While some community members actually describe the violence in their communities as genocidal, they often emphasize that the underlying causes are ethnic and material, such as land grabs, rather than on religious differences alone. Nevertheless, the high level of insecurity across Nigeria has left many religious communities, including Christians, at risk. The failure to hold the perpetrators of these violent acts accountable has created both a sense of impunity among the attackers and a sense of grievance in the affected communities. Nigerian citizens have mixed reactions to the US redesignation of Nigeria as a country of particular concern. Many particular Christian groups welcome the attention, seeing it as a chance to push the Nigerian government to act against the violence. However, there are also concerns among many Nigerians, including Christians, that President Trump's threats of military action could also exacerbate existing political tensions. Public opinion surveys overall in Nigeria indicate a public consensus on the seriousness of the security challenges in the country, with many Nigerians valuing their diverse communities and believing in shared national unity over divisions. Now allow me to offer some concrete recommendations. First, to the United States government. It's important to engage deeply and broadly with communities across Nigeria. The US can play a constructive role, but it must avoid selective intervention and address the concerns of all Nigerians across all religions to prevent worsening sectarian divisions. Two, it's important to rethink reactive quick-win actions that may seem beneficial to Nigerians, but could have larger and far-reaching negative impacts. If the Trump administration proceeds with unilateral military action in Nigeria, it could endanger the Christians it aims to protect and worsens divisions along religious lines. Third, prioritize security governance to help tackle the violence. The US should reassess its security cooperation with Nigeria, focusing on building a program that prioritizes security governance and ties military support to tangible reforms. This renewed partnership should extend beyond military aid to include intelligence sharing, rule of law, and governance. 4, support local actors that are advancing inclusive peace and conflict resolution. Supporting moderate religious leaders and community networks in developing early warning systems can shift the focus from identity-based conflict to sustainable solutions. 5, work more with Nigeria's states and its growing city centers. The U.S. government should decentralize its engagement with Nigeria by strengthening dialogue and support for receptive leaders at state and local levels, particularly in the Middle Belt, which is home to about 45 million people. The focus should be on local security to foster a safe environment for agriculture and manufacturing. This approach should integrate economic development with sustainable peace by addressing root causes of the conflict through economic revitalization, institutional reform, and business initiatives. Finally, for the U.S. government, it is important to revive the U.S. Congressional Bipartisan Caucus on Nigeria. The U.S. relationship with Nigeria is a key strategic partnership in Africa. An active bipartisan congressional caucus will highlight this importance, foster discussions, and provide a platform for diverse perspectives to better inform legislative responses on various issues. Now, recommendations for the Nigerian government. It is important to appoint a Nigerian ambassador to the United States to improve its international engagement and manage narratives about its security realities. It's critical for President Tinubu to appoint a capable Nigerian ambassador to the US, as I also recommended in my testimony in March. Second, the Nigerian government needs to make accountability of both perpetrators and of the authorities central to the response. Nigerian citizens need justice, as criminality in the Middle Belt has increased due to impunity. The narrative of Christian genocide has gained traction because of years of mass killings without accountability, leaving many faith communities feeling abandoned. Third, Nigerian government needs to get serious about police reform. Nigeria's single federalized police force struggles to address the country's complex security challenges. The Tinubu administration needs to accelerate initiatives to improve citizen security, including the recruitment of 30,000 new police personnel he approved in June. The military in Nigeria is overextended. Many of them are handling duties that should be handled by the police. And it's essential to think about how the country reassigns police officers that are currently providing personal security to wealthy elites to focus more on the serious crimes. Next, coordinate federal and state action and messaging. Effective coordination so desperately needed among Nigeria's federal and state governments is often undermined by finger pointing, and this must stop. Finally, for the Nigerian government, it's important to start laying the groundwork for peaceful elections in 2027. Nigeria must address the use of religion as a trigger for electoral violence. The new leadership in its election commission presents a chance to restore public trust in the electoral system, promote responsible political behavior, and strengthen security and judicial processes. The violence in Nigeria has resulted in significant loss of life. However, addressing the country's complex security issues solely in religious terms and focusing on one group of victims is counterproductive. A fresh approach is needed both for Nigeria and the United States. Nigeria must tackle its institutional weaknesses in security, justice, and conflict prevention to effectively end the violence and hold perpetrators accountable. The US should engage in open dialogue and cooperation, fostering a better understanding of Nigeria's complexities. Both countries can leverage current diplomatic tensions to strengthen their bilateral relationship and collaboratively address the wider threats of jihadist violence in Nigeria and the surrounding West Africa and Sahel region, as both nations have vital interests at stake. Thank you again for inviting me to testify, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you so very much for your testimony. We do have a video I'd like to show. This is of Mrs. Akpen, a survivor of the Yelwada massacre. She lost 5 of her children. The baby in her hands is her one remaining child, but she and so many others who were slaughtered that day, her family. We hear from them, we hear from her, the priest in the picture, that the horror is, the PTSD from that is just unthinkable. And so I just want to It's a very short but very powerful video.
Good afternoon, good evening. It depends on where you're watching us from. I am Reverend Father Philip Apple, the coordinator of the Foundation for Justice, Development and Peace, FJDP, of the Catholic Diocese of Makurdi, Benue State, here in Nigeria. I am here with one of the survivors of the Yelwater massacre of 13th of June 2025 here in Nigeria, where we lost over 200 lives in a single night. So she is here to be witness as one of the survivors of that grave attack. So we'll listen to her. That her name is Msoshima Akpen. That when they went into sleep that fateful night, around 9 p.m., the Fulani terrorists attacked them where they were sleeping. That they were locked inside the camp, Al Yelwater, and they were butchering them with cutlasses and shooting guns as well. When they thought all had finished at some point in time, they poured petrol on the building, and majority of them were set ablaze. That in the course of this action, she saw a tree up when she lifted up her eyes, and she raised her head on the tree, climbed up where she was able to hit herself. That her 5 children that she left below were crying, and in her presence they were being slaughtered by the terrorists.
Okay.
That she ran out into the bush at some point, and those who came for rescue would now bring her out of that place at some point, and she was able to witness the whole drama. And when the people came, they were now relocated to a new camp. So thank you very much. This is the much we can receive from Msoshima Akpen. God bless you.
Thank you very much. And we now go to questions. Let me just ask, on one of my trips to Nigeria, I did visit the Fusion Center, which there was a great deal of cooperation beginning. And I mentioned that our ambassador, Mike Waltz, to the United Nations was actually deployed there as a Green Beret and a part of a special forces training component. There was a great hesitancy on the part of our government to engage that to the degree that would really make a difference. And I'll tell you what they told me. They said that they were worried about the applying the Leahy law so that we do not fund or train human rights violators. So believing that, I actually asked, I had a hearing, and Ed Royce did a hearing on the full committee, and we asked the Undersecretary of State under the Obama administration how many could be trained. And she said, matter of factly, half. We don't need half, but a large number, half would be, that could be trained in counterinsurgency. They wanted night vision goggles. They wanted intel to track down Boko Haram and these other then emerging groups, ISIS West Africa, for example, and it never really materialized the way it could have. Now, one of the hopes I have, and we hope many of us have, coming out of this, will be that there will be a renewed effort to, again, support human rights trained people, men and women who are not accused, and certainly that is a very difficult thing to prove one way or the other. The lay law is very hard to implement. And I sat through an actual session with a Foreign Service officer in Abuja.
Well, you have watched the video, at least you have been in the know concerning what is really happening on this Nigeria genocide allegation that is happening in Nigeria. It's no longer allegation, it's reality, because there are so many evidences that are available that over the internet, social media, everywhere, evidences. Well, I am still Chinedu until I come your way next time.